Welcome to another episode of Conversations with Neighbours. We got Jason Froats on the show today. Welcome.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for having me, Myles.
First time at the office. I always ask, how do you like it when you come in?
I love it. Very, very cool.
You know, it's kind of selfish question because you know the answer of it. But okay, so Jason, thank you so much for coming on the show. Jason is an ADHD Performance Coach. Would you say that? Would that be the proper title for it, or I don't want to put you in a box. So
no, that's all right. That's all right. That in fact, that's a term that I've coined over the years. An ADHD coach, I guess, would be the official kind of title. But I like to throw in the performance piece because I think one of the things that I do quite effectively, I like to think so, is improving cognitive performance with my clients. So, and finding ways to best manage one's ADHD.
Yeah. So, I feel like ADHD kind of as a topic has become more and more at the forefront. I don't know, maybe it's just the algorithm feeding it to me, but I feel like it's a much more discussed topic. Maybe dive into ADHD as a whole, explain it to me as if I don't know what it is or what kind of falls under ADHD, as if I'm, coming to you to learn. I think that would be best.
Sure. No, happy to. It's interesting. I've been doing this for about 15 years now. And when I started, there was not a lot of press on ADHD. There was certainly not. It's not as well. The accommodations in university and high school and stuff and the education system weren't there as much. I would say it was also more of a stigma around it. There still is, unfortunately. But ADHD stands for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And I've never liked the name, Myles, because I think it's a misnomer. I think many coaches, many other professionals in this area would probably say the same because, the name has evolved over the years. But ADHD is, and in my personal professional opinion, is not a deficit in attention. Often it can be the opposite of that. It can be a hyper focus of attention on unhelpful things, or distractions. But essentially what it is in the human brain, the frontal lobe of our brain is where a lot of our critical thought and processing happens. So decision making, planning, organizing, scheduling, remembering to follow through on something, that kind of stuff. So that all happens in the kind of the prefrontal cortex. What they believe, and they don't know exactly what causes this, although it's about a 48% chance hereditary, disease, I won't call it disease, but a condition where if one or both parents have ADHD, there's a flip a coin, right? And one of your kids is going to have it too. But what they think causes it is certainly the symptoms are a lack of dopamine or other neurotransmitters in the frontal lobe of the brain. So when there's a deficiency, but it's more of a dysregulation of that. So then you end up having, it's kind of like if, your dopamine level should be here. For somebody with ADHD, they're down here. And so it doesn't necessarily make you slower or anything like that. It's not contagious. It just means that when we have to concentrate and make a decision on something or organize something, that sometimes it's harder for us to do that.
Is it just is born into you, and it's like you either have it or you don't have it? Is it or can you I don't know, as you develop, it just becomes more aware of it? Can you? I guess what I'm asking, it's is it just this as it from a kid, or the awareness of it? What's the discovery tool of ADHD, or maybe it's suppressed, or I don't know, what's the piece of it?
It's a great question. Because when I look back at when I was diagnosed finally with ADHD, I was 26 years old. And back then, a lot of kids were getting diagnosed with ADHD, but they were the more overt, obvious types, right? They were the ones that were, if you will, drawing a lot of attention to themselves in a classroom. So they might be the ones disturbing the class, looking out the window, fidgeting with something, and they were the obvious ones that, okay, there's an attentional problem here. We need to, maybe we need to get this child assessed. I was more, and there's different kinds of ADHD, right? And I was more the stealthy ADHD, right? Where inattentive, where I was not acting out, I was not hyperactive in class. I was the one who kind of suffered in silence. I would sit there, I'd be trying to pay attention to the teacher, what he or she was saying, and I missed it. And I'd have to, ask again, or I wouldn't. I'd be too shy to. So that I wouldn't get the homework done properly or the exercise done properly. So, how did I discover my ADHD? Well, as often many of my clients discover, unfortunately, is, if you're not diagnosed with it earlier, right? I.e., if you're not the obvious hyperactive person, right? Right, then how else does one know? And I think to your point, to your question, it's really it kind of takes a trained eye in a way, but at the same time, if one suspects that there's attentional challenges, or the child, for example, says, "Hey, mom, dad, I'm finding it difficult to pay attention in class," or the teacher notices, well, then that's a good sign that, okay, maybe we should get our child assessed. By a professional, like a psychologist, for example. Yeah.
Can you assess me?
No, I wish I could. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a medical doctor.
Yeah, it's who do I go to get assessed? I'm just for sure having attention or focused is a difficult thing. It's basic, if I were. This is why I don't read books. Reading a book, and then it's I'm 2 pages in, and I'm I didn't consume any of that. Something else has happened. A word had triggered something else too. And I have a very active mind, right?
Yes.
Always going to sometimes a detriment of mental health. It's it could turn on you badly, but always active. And then I compare myself watching my wife do work and stuff, and her ability to just stay on one task and just do the whole task, even if it took 45 an hour long.
Yeah.
I'm that is torture to me, where it's
it's a good word,
where simple task, and that it's just that crushes me. It's actually painful to do that.
Very interesting. And it's funny, because Myles, I think you mentioned that before, that you thought maybe there's a chance you have ADHD, but I've got to say that our tribe, if I could include you in that possibly, that we're great actors. And we're also great at coping. We found ways, especially, high functioning ADHD, where you really, you find clever ways to kind of make it work, Yeah,
I would say my clever way is I just do multiple things at the same time, where it's I'm doing this thing, they'll just come over here, do this, come over here, answer this email, do this, come over here, continue on this task,
Nice.
And then it's instead of just being okay, let's do the emails and let's do the ads and let's create this content and blocked out, it's ripping through all of them at the same time.
If I could interrupt for a quick sec, you've highlighted something that's really, really important, I think, and that is that somebody with ADHD, it's considered in the DSM-5, right, to be a condition, a mental health condition, right? I don't necessarily see it that way. I certainly see it as a challenge, and certain challenges come with ADHD, but I really see it more of a different way of thinking. It could be, in our part of our primitive brain. I'm not sure, back in our evolution, when other people in our tribe were hunting and gathering, or gathering, let's say, we were more the hunters. We were the ones who really resonated with the stimulation of tracking an animal, let's say, and then and killing the animal, bringing it back. That's just more in our wheelhouse. It's very specific. There's a beginning and end to it. It's more exciting. So, nobody really knows for sure, and this is just pure, theory. But I think that what you just said about how your wife is very logical and follows things through in an organized way that she has planned for herself in a day, whereas somebody like yourself, and that would be me included and probably 90% of my clients, if they were to do that and place out a schedule for the day, the chances of them following that through are very, very slim because they're going to get distracted along the way. They're going to, it might be, honestly, well, you use the word torture, painful, mentally painful to kind of follow that through. So there's a difference in the way we think. And that's what I do as a coach is I try to leverage, the way that you already think and still get the stuff done.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Yeah.
It does make sense. And even as you say that, it's like, without even me kind of realizing why or how I did it, like, because before I always wanted to like build like a kind of the daily routine of like, get this done, this. Sure. But I changed that to be like, these are kind of the core areas that I need to focus on, but I give myself like the week to kind of get the things done where it's not dialed into like a 24-hour cycle. It's on a 7-day cycle. So cool. And it has helped like tremendously because it's like, I know that I could do it, and where it's not like, a day slipped, like I didn't do what I said I was supposed to do.
Right.
It's definitely a framework that has helped. Also, when you said that, I'm saying all this, but I can also like catch a thread on something that interests me, and I could be like thinking through that for like 3 hours straight, from like start to end, and just like not even realize like time will disappear doing that as well too.
Absolutely.
So it's like this balance of figuring out how to do that. Okay, so
no, that's so. If I could jump in, not to interrupt again, but two things. One is you mentioned something called hyperfocus, which is that ability you said to kind of lock in to one thing. It's like a tractor beam, right? And you get sucked into it. But the power of hyperfocus is amazing when it's used in the right direction. Right. So we have this, it's 80 years, we have, some strengths. And one of the strengths is this power of hyperfocus and the power of tenacity. And so we're like a dog with a bone. We are not going to let go of that. If we are interested in it, does this make sense to you?
Oh, yeah.
We are in there, and we're going to like circumnavigate all the possible, permutations of that thing. And we're going to know it cold, And so I think there's, I won't digress here, but hyperfocus is one of those things that's really, really, really a strength of ours. And the other thing is the 7-day week, like looking at things not on a daily basis, but on a weekly basis. And it's funny you say that actually, because it's my clients that have helped me realize that that's what tends to work for our tribe the most, at least in my experience, because if it's too rigorous a schedule, and tell me if this makes sense or not, but like, let's say, I'm going to run in the morning, I'm going to take out the garbage when I get back, I'm going to feed the dog, I'm going to do all this work, and then I'm going to prep dinner, blah, 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 right? So that's all one day. When you get back from your run, let's say, or from exercising, and you get into the first item on that list, you might not feel mentally like doing that, right? And it's like, oh, that's like pulling teeth. I really don't feel like doing that right now. And so feeling mentally, if we want to do something or not, has a big factor. And so I try to incorporate a 7-day schedule, but one that incorporates flexibility. So you can move, kind of like time blocking, move those blocks around. You still get all the blocks done in the week, but you get the opportunity to move them around where you want.
Yeah, for sure. I do feel like a natural procrastinator where it's like, I'll just like, another thing, it's like the comparison with my wife. She's like, we should just do this right now. I'm like,
right.
We're not doing that now. Like,
that doesn't feel.
I'll get it done. Don't worry, it will be done. But
it's, for sure.
So walk me through kind of like coaching with you, right? So it's like, okay, Myles, you have ADHD. It's time for a coach. What's the process like what with you then?
I guess, do you mean the process of finding a coach, or when you actually start working with a
working
coach?
With what? Like the full tilt, like obviously you'll have like a suite of different ways that you can kind of attack it, but I assume like one-on-one coaching is one of the primary things.
Yeah, that's
the core.
For 15 years, it's been the
core of it. So yeah, let's look through the lens of like one-on-one coaching, like kind of like an outline or, what I could expect.
Great question. One-on-one coaching, I think that, it's funny. I didn't know anything about coaching, 15 years ago. And then it was my wife that said, why don't you start dealing. By the way, I have ADHD, if you haven't noticed. So I should have mentioned that up front. Yeah, like I said, I got diagnosed when I was 26, but I waited until like my early 30s to actually deal with it, And it kind of sucks because I think if I, had been diagnosed earlier, like if teachers and or my parents, had seen it in me earlier and I got it treated earlier, I think my life would have been different. I'm not saying better necessarily, but I think I would have been more in control at an earlier age of it. So long story short, it was my wife that said, one of her clients, she's an accountant, and one of her clients was an ADHD coach. And she said, why don't you just go talk to Barbara, And I'm like, what's a coach and what's an ADHD coach? And she's like, just go talk to her. So we made an appointment. I went and I talked to Barbara. And may she rest in peace, Barbara Durr. She was an amazing person, a great coach. One of the first ADHD coaches in Canada. So when I went to see Barbara, amazing things happened. Like no one ever asked me what my strengths were. It was like, it's such a busy world that we live in, right? And everybody's just kind of thinking about them. I don't want to say everybody thinking about themselves.
Well, they are.
But they are,
yeah.
Right? And so coaching, even just forget about ADHD coaching, but coaching itself is one of these kind of noble, I think, professions where I think a good coach is somebody who really does care about their client. And when I'm coaching my best, Myles, I'm hyper-focused on you. And what's the best thing for Myles right now? And how do I motivate, but also how do I enable Myles to achieve the goals that he wants to achieve in his life, not mine. It's not about my ego. This is about everything I've got in my wheelhouse. How can I help Myles? And so Barbara did that with me, and I loved it. I remember walking out of her office. Every time I had a session with her, I walking out going, the world is just brighter. It's more hopeful. I just felt like someone understands me. Someone for the first time. I don't know if she had ADHD or not, but someone understood what it's like to have it, and also gave me the perspective that you can do anything. Heck, you can do whatever you want to do in life. You just have to set it up, and you have to also believe that you can, right? So I think she inspired me to become a coach. Unfortunately, Barbara passed away and a while ago, and I took over a bunch of her her books and her strategies and stuff like that, and then developed them in my own way later. What would coaching look like? What does coaching maybe look like for a new client? I try to kind of emulate what Barbara would do, and that is the first thing is to create a connection, is to really let the other person know that I know what it's like to have ADHD. I know what it's like to live with, how difficult it can be, specifically in certain situations too. It's uncanny how when someone, it happens with a new client occasionally where they say, well, what do you know? You don't know what it's like to be me. And I'm like, well, maybe you're right. Maybe I don't know, but can I take a shot? And they'd be like, sure. Okay. Does this happen when you do that? When you're, like you were talking about, like when you're interested in something, you move, heaven and earth to get that done. Yes, that's true. There's so many different things, and they're like, you get it. Even my wife doesn't get it, or even my doctor doesn't get it. So yeah, so I think getting the person, really connecting with them in a way that they know that you understand, that you actually give a crap, that you actually do care, right? And then the next thing is really coaching is it's not about the coach. Therapy has its own place, and therapy can be very effective. I work with a group of psychologists and psychiatrists who are great at what they do, but they're not coaches, and I'm not a therapist, right? Coaching is it's a communication style where you're really trying to get the best out of the person, and it's about letting them craft their own solutions too. So, for example, if you were to become a client, Myles, right, and you're like, Jason, I don't know how to get stuff done in a given week, and I were to say, okay, I've got all these books here, and 3 out of the 5 books say, this is the daily schedule that you've got to use, right? And I push it over and say, this is what science says, or this is what these experts say. There you go, Myles. You're going to look at it, and you're going to go, A, it's a book. B, you don't know what it's like to be me. C, I kind of want to have some, opportunity to invest in this myself. And so coaching doesn't do that. Coaching I might have all that there. I might have that knowledge. But I'll ask you, what do you think? And you might not know. But then that's where I kind of present like a buffet of options. And you might say, I don't know why, Jason, but that 7-day, week, that 7-day schedule it's attractive to me. I don't know why. Well, let's start there. Maybe we can co-create this together.
Yeah, it's like you have like the suite of systems and tactics, but that it's also going to be like a completely tailored solution depending on who the individual is and where they're at in life, what goes on in their world. It's like the schedule for, the 24-year-old student is a lot different than, the 37-year-old with 2 young kids.
Exactly.
Right. And kind of working within that. And also, I would like to think that with coaching, like the accountability tool of like having a coach would probably be a big thing, right? Of just you as my coach and kind of holding myself accountable that maybe I'm going to do the actions that I set out to do.
Right.
Like I think that a lot of times, we make big plans for ourselves, right? But it's like you're only making it to yourself, right? So the consequences are pretty low.
Right.
It's like, oh, I didn't do it this week, or I didn't do it this month, or I didn't do it this year, or I can just make stuff up in my head and be like, oh, this one. But like if it's a weekly call with you and it's like, so Myles, you said that you wanted to do this, and this, like,
Right.
show me the sheet that you did it, right? Like I assume that accountability is a big piece of that. Would you think?
It is. Yeah. It is. But something? It's funny. I think a lot of people come into coaching looking for that. They're looking for that kind of accountability, right? They're looking for, okay, well, at least I'm going to be accountable to a third party, other than myself, because trying to be accountable to myself in the past has not worked. I try to take that a step further, though, because I think that it's one thing, okay, great. You're accountable to me, and every week that we meet for an hour, and there's always action, by the way, after a coaching session. So it's like, because action is the answer, I believe. It's like, it's great to talk about stuff, but what is the, specific deliberate action you're going to take this week? And it could be like a tiny little step, right? But at least it's moving the right direction, right? So the client will hopefully feel wind in their face every week. But I think that the accountability piece, I try to shift it as we coach together to them so that, when I'm not there, right? Because I'm often not there, right? I'm only there an hour a week, usually, right? When I'm not there, how do they learn how to hold themselves accountable in a way that's authentic to themselves, in a way that it's not beating themselves up too much, but is a way that, I kind of teach them how to coach themselves, so that I'm out of a job by the end of this, the relationship, which is really what's supposed to happen.
Yeah,
right?
For sure.
Yeah.
What's like kind of a core client that you would normally see? Like what's their kind of customer avatar of that person? And I don't know if you're allowed to share like a success story without like sharing personal details of maybe someone that has, been a part of your world and, kind of their journey, some type of touch point on that.
Sure. I'm just thinking here. I guess if I were to kind of do a cross section of my practice right now, and even in the last, say, 10 years, I would say I've had maybe three foci, three kind of categories. I started working with students, right? So, and specifically college, university students, sometimes high school. I just got request today to coach somebody who's 15. which I don't usually coach that young because the maturity sometimes isn't there or often isn't there. But not always. Sometimes I've coached, people as young as 13, 14, and the maturity level is so high because they've had some things in their life that they've done that they've had to work towards. Maybe they're like an Olympic swimmer or who knows what, right? But I think, so the first category would be students kind of, again, grade 12, college, university. The second category would be, I would say, executives, entrepreneurs, self-employed individuals. Often they kind of self-select those careers because of the flexibility of when they do things. For example, if they can create some kind of structure for themselves, they love the freedom of being able to do that. So corporate. I've worked with some, give you an example, I guess, like a lot of CEOs, actually, a lot of senior execs, so C-level executives, owners as well, owners of small, medium-sized businesses. I even worked with I can't say names, right, but one of the largest caterers, the CEO of one of the largest catering companies in North America, and out of Los Angeles, and so working with him for a while. And so, like all over the place. And I guess the third category more recently in the last 5 years has been working with physicians, actually, so the medical staff. So I gave a presentation I think it was about 6 years ago, to the Ontario Medical Association talking about ADHD and coaching. And I wasn't sure, honestly, how many people were going to show up, because they're physicians, and I'm thinking, there's a lot of controversy around the diagnosis of ADHD. Is it overdiagnosed and all that kind of stuff? So I thought, I feel like I'm going to be like a punching bag when I get in front of these doctors. But I was so pleasantly surprised. I got up there, and I was grateful that the place was full of physicians. And by the way, it's the Ontario Medical Association's Physicians Health Program, which is basically a supportive organization for doctors, or like soon to be doctors, so med students, residents, and doctors in their full blown practices, right? And so they asked me to speak about ADHD, and so I talked to them, and it was people were standing, there's not enough seats in the room for everybody. My own physician from when I was growing up happened to be there, and he's like, Jason. And it was pretty wild. It was pretty surreal. And what came out of that was, we need more support for physicians who have ADHD. So that would be the third category. So working with doctors. And you asked me about a success story. And so again, without mentioning names, I think that probably one of the biggest success stories I've had has been working with a psychiatrist who came to me about 3 years ago. Who's her husband is a doctor as well. He's a GP, and she's a psychiatrist. And I think her life was I don't want to say in shambles, but there was a lot of challenges personally and professionally, not getting things done, schedules not being met. She has 2 young kids, and not having time even to meet them, make dinner for them, that kind of thing. Long story short is I helped her create, I taught her how to time block in a way that made sense for her brain, and because she had used all these different schedulers and agendas and systems at work and stuff, but nothing really worked for her. Nothing really crossed the threshold between personal and professional either. Like, how do you tackle that without being overwhelmed and all that kind of stuff? So we worked on that for a little while, and I'm happy to say that, I've been working, I'm seeing her tomorrow, actually, and we meet every Thursday. And I've been working with her for the last almost 4 years now.
Oh, wow.
And so now she's like, Jason, thank you so much. Thank you. I've now, her husband, when we first met, they were not having a great relationship because, he also suffers from ADHD. But he figured it out. He figured out ways to make it work for him. And so he's very deliberate, very organized, but she wasn't. And so I think there was a lot of resentment. Why can't you figure this out? And so when we started working together, she started to just blossom. and started to execute on that schedule and then carve in time for her kids and for her family and all that kind of stuff. But more importantly than just a schedule, Myles, it was also, what are the rules of engagement that she puts around those kind of carved out times for those people and for herself? Like, what do I do if? So I have a lot of my strategies as a coach are not just like, here's a tool that you can use, but how do you use a tool? And the power of pre-decision, like, okay, and planning. So like, what happens if this happens? I'll be the king of like being devil's advocate. Like, Myles, what happens if that happens? What are you going to do? Oh, I hadn't thought of that yet. Okay. And then you come up with all these contingency plans. And before you know it, you've got these rules of engagement for most situations that might occur in a given week. And you're like, I'm getting stuff done. I'm more assertive with people. Like, what she'll say to me is like, she has a staff, she has a clinic that she runs. And she's like, my staff, they used to ask me to go out for a coffee, and I, being a people pleaser, I would say, yes, I'll go. But she's like, wait, if I say yes to that, that means I'm saying no to my son tonight.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Right?
Yeah. I actually had a call today. They're like pitching me on this thing, and it's like, every time I say yes, like I'm saying no to something else. There's a finite number of hours, I'm like, there's 16 hours during the day, and like sleep for 16 hours during the day. And it's like, how do you allocate those time things and all the different aspects of your life? At the beginning of this, you're talking about kind of like the dopamine level of it. It's got to be tough now too, like in a 2025 world with like all these social apps, which is just like, they're pretty much built to like capture your attention too and like fire you up. And really, I think like dopamine fatigue is kind of a more common thing now, because it's just like, it's everywhere, like sucking it out of you, right? So if you were already starting from like a lower like baseline, right? And then you're going to go down too, like, is that something that you see, or is that common, or am I making something up here?
Not at all. Huge. I mean, you're seeing people who don't have ADHD, who don't have an official diagnosis of ADHD, suffering from ADHD symptoms because of the way these algorithms are written, and the way our phones are designed, and it's unfortunately, so it's very interesting. I find neuroscience fascinating, and whether one has ADHD or not, whether one is neurotypical or not, because of neuroplasticity, we can train our brains in different ways, right? And so I'm not saying you can train your brain out of ADHD, but you can certainly improve things a lot. You can certainly, for example, find ways to increase dopamine levels naturally, right? Without just taking stimulant medication. Stimulant medication can be very, very helpful. I take stimulant medication, a very small amount. But I don't just take stimulant medication. I think that, one can, do many other things. I call it the 3 pillars. So diet, sleep, exercise. So, it's been proven that more of a protein-based, low glycemic, type foods are very helpful for the ADHD brain. You're not going to get spikes in glucose and energy and crashes, right? Sleep hygiene is probably the most important, honestly. So getting a good regular sleep. And how do you do that, though? Especially when we tend to be night hawks, right?
Yeah. It's a lot of work to good sleep, but it's the most important thing. I was like really focused on like getting good sleep for a long time, and I got really, really good, like solid sleep. Then I had a baby December 1st. And the first month of it, I was like, I'm absolutely fried, like, because we were waking him up every 3 hours, and it's like, oh my goodness. Now we're starting to stretch some hours together during the night, like, oh my God, the first like 4.5 hours, like stretch, full sleep, life-changing. But yeah, that sleep piece of it, it's funny too, like that diet too. When you were saying that, I'm like, so just do the exact opposite of the classic the food pyramid thing, right? Flip it upside down. And then obviously, exercise and move your body, just get some movement going too.
Huge. They say actually that, 20 minutes of rigorous cardiovascular exercise makes huge difference for your brain. In fact, when I was seeing Barbara, my coach, she said, Jason, it's proven that stimulant medication is the best that we know of so far, the best intervention for treating ADHD. And I'm like, I don't take aspirin. I don't want to take meds for the rest of my life. And she's like, okay, well, this is a physiological thing, because of, and not just dopamine. There's other neurotransmitters like serotonin and other stuff. You have to do something. I'm like, well, what can I do? And she's like, do you play sports? I'm like, well, I used to like to run cross country. She's like, why don't you start running? And so I did, and in lieu of taking medication. So for I would say, 10, 12 years, I just ran my heart out. I just ran like crazy. Lost, 50 pounds in the process. I can't believe I weighed that much, but I'm tall, so I could hide it better. But in some ways, ADHD kind of, I don't want to say saved my life, but improved my life because of the exercise. And I felt, so again, I didn't take medication for that period of time. And while exercise was greatly helpful, to be honest, for me at least, it was the combination of taking a small dose of stimulant medication, exercising, like I run with my dog a lot in the forest around here, 3 times a week, and I'll swim sometimes. And then also I try to really get a good sleep and eat a lot of protein. So the combination of all those things, even if you just took the stimulants with with the exercise, the running, it's like it softened the meds. Everything just seemed more natural, and I could focus. I could follow through on things better. I could implement a lot of the behavioral strategies that I coach my clients with and use them myself, obviously, right?
Yeah, for sure. What do you advice for maybe parents that maybe there's signs of that? Like, what is some thoughts of parents of my kid is, distracted and all that too. Like, what advice would you give them? Would it just be, bring it to the forefront and put some awareness on it and let's get it checked out? Or it's or he's just a kid, or, what's
tough.
or is it, I guess it really is just a case by case thing of it. But, yeah, I don't know. Parents, I guess that would be my.
Sure. No, it's a great question because I think again, looking at my story, right? I wish I had been diagnosed earlier. My marks, for example, in school were average, above average, I would say, in elementary school, public school. And so my brother, he was the hyperactive one, right? And he never got diagnosed with ADHD. He never went and got assessed. But I'm sure he's got ADHD. And so my mother, I remember, wanted to take him to a place to get assessed, but at that time it was hard to find and stuff, so he never got diagnosed. But I was the one who kind of suffered in silence, right? Because I didn't say much. I was more the shy, quiet kid, right? But so ironically, I was the one who had got who has ADHD. I think he has it too, probably.
Yeah.
Right. But to answer your question, I think for parents who suspect that their son or daughter might have ADHD, vis-a-vis teachers saying, hey, I've noticed Johnny is looking out the window a lot, or, wasn't writing down, the homework for the last week or so, or what have you, or isn't handing things on time, right? Or isn't finishing, let's say, a test or an exam, and, gets great marks all the way through, but then runs out of time at the end, kind of thing. These are all very kind of stereotypical scenarios I'm giving. I don't want anybody to take this and say, oh, if he or she doesn't do these things, then he or she doesn't have ADHD. It's really if you notice, kind of the quintessential symptoms of ADHD are like distractibility, lack of focus, lack of follow through, task time management issues, that kind of thing. Then, I think it's worth intervening sooner than later if you can. I'm not saying go out and get a $3,000 assessment at our clinic, but I would definitely talk to the teachers. I would definitely talk to those who are. It might not even be school. It could be a Taekwondo class. It could be at soccer practice. But just get that information, and if you do suspect that, then I would I would take it, to the next step and start to educate yourself about what ADHD is. And you don't necessarily need someone to officially diagnose your kid, right? There's so much information out there. But if you get to a point where you're like, I think that Johnny has ADHD, there's also a lot of misinformation out there. Get him properly assessed, right? Because then, and what does that look like, and how does one do that? There's a few ways that you can do it, but the most common way, and I think the most effective way, is to go to a psychologist, so a trusted psychologist who understands ADHD. I work alongside a little shout out to the Chrysalis Center in Markham, which is where I've been practicing for the last. I work with them. I have my own practice, but I work with the Chrysalis Center in Markham. I've been working with them for like 15 years, and they really understand ADHD, and they do proper, full ADHD assessments for youth. And then with that, so that's one way you can do it. But with that assessment, you can take that to a school board. You can take that to your teacher or to the CERT, right, the special education resource teacher, and they can implement accommodations for your child at school. So they have things like extended time. They could have, like in university, a note taker. There's a bunch of different accommodations, right? It could be a quiet place to write an exam or a test, that kind of thing. So it can be very helpful for somebody with ADHD to have those extra accommodations in place.
Very good. I'm just thinking of school for me, honestly. That's where my mind
How was
good.
School for you?
Like elementary school is like easy, right? Mm-hmm. So like I always remember like elementary school easy, but always like the EQ things where you get like
EQAO?
No, like the social skills.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Always got E's, excellence for those.
Nice.
Going to high school, I actually took like gifted English or something like that. 2 gifted classes, grade 9, probably because elementary school is so easy.
Right.
But I was in the high performance athlete program. I was there for sports.
Okay.
But by the time I was in grade 11, grade 12, I was out at school. Down. And like, I wasn't doing any homework. I was doing bare minimum, like couldn't do anything. I remember at the end of high school, I was like, I don't even know what I'm doing after this, right? Like sports are over.
Right.
But then I got like introduced into the world of business with like my first product, did the first product at 18. And then they opened up this whole new world. And I was like, oh, I found like the playground that I can play forever. And it actually gave me energy and I was interested in it. And I've been just obsessed with that for 15 years now, right?
Cool.
But before that point, I was like lost and confused. I don't know what I'm doing. Even so much so that did the first one and they're like, well, you don't know anything about business, so go to school for business. So I went to St. Lawrence College for business marketing. And I was like one semester in, and I'm like, I can't just sit here and learn it. I got to do it. Like, I got to actually apply this. So I started my second one, my first real business while I was in college. So I was like, okay, you can teach me this, but I'm actually going to go practice it. And then, like I said, I've been doing it ever since. And, you said that they kind of pick this area because I just call it like there's always an infinite list. There's always something to get done, right? Like I could pick up anything and like do it. And as I've kind of gone through the business career of it, it's so clear to me that I need an operating partner with me because I'm so terrible at like day-to-day operation stuff,
right.
Which is like going back to my wife being like, oh, like just actually do the tasks that need to be done. Where I'm like,
just do it, right?
Yeah. It's like, that's not going to happen. So now it's like, okay, you're in the business world, but you always need to have a partner that's like an operator, a true operator. But it's just funny to me thinking back now.
sort of, no, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think it's so cool though that you figured out, from my humble perspective as a coach, I'm just like noticing a few things. And again, this assumes that you have ADHD and we don't know if you do or not, but a few things. One is that, you found ways to schedule your time that work for you. You've noticed that if things, even though they're on a list, right, doesn't mean they're going to get done, right? and you also realize that delegation is going to be important, so that you've shamelessly kicked your ego out the window and said, hey, I suck at perhaps following through, getting things done in this way. I need a silent partner perhaps that's going to help me with this. And that's one of the things that I've highly suggest, even like for my CEO clients, right? Who do you have as a resource that you can pull in to help you with this stuff, like an admin assistant or somebody?
Yeah, for sure. Like I've already looked at my kind of 30 to 40 chunk of like, this is the decade of delegation, learn how to build a team. So that's kind of what I'm focused on for this era.
Yeah.
So
nice.
Give me a final takeaway for the listeners, any parting messages or thoughts that you'd like to leave them?
Man, I don't know. That's a really, that's a good question. I think I want to say to anybody listening who thinks they might have ADHD or has ADHD, this is one thing I share with a lot of clients is, first of all, having ADHD can suck, right? Because of all the challenges it brings, especially in a society where we expect certain things, things to be done on time and it's fast moving and so many things at the same time, which is usually overwhelming for somebody with ADHD. Don't beat yourself up. There is hope there, and it's not necessarily always through a coach, but it is a multi-pronged approach that you can implement yourself, right? Through diet, sleep, exercise, and behavioral strategies that work for your brain. So find, when you notice things that work for you, success leaves clues. Jot them down. Have a little book where you can just write down, this worked for me. That worked for me. That doesn't work for me. Just like you said, there's 30-40% of stuff that's like, okay, I'm just gonna have my, do what you do best and delegate the rest. If you can do that, do it, right? Focus on what you're great at and what you love to do too. That's I had a parent recently ask me, hey, if there's one thing that my son could do for himself, or we could help him with to progress with his ADHD, to best manage his ADHD and move on with his career and his life, what would it be? And I said, figure out what you love to do. Figure out what you're passionate about. Because with ADHD, it requires a lot of energy to get through the stuff that sucks.
Yeah.
Right?
Torture.
It's torture, right? It's like another coach who in Newfoundland that I've worked with before, funny guy. And he's like, ADHD is like having, watching TV and somebody else having the remote, right? And they're flipping the channels around, right? But it's also, he also said, and I love this one too, is, it's like walking, at times, it's like walking through 3 feet of mud. And we're trying to get to where we want to go, and we're getting in trouble because we can't get there quick enough. And it's like, I don't know how to get rid of the mud, So it can be really, really hard, but don't give up. And trust me, it can be great. Life can be great. And the last thing I'll say is that, as challenging as ADHD has been for me, it's also, I think, made life really interesting for me. So I've been really blessed with having the opportunity to really express my ADHD and do lots of crazy things in my life that a lot of people have never done. So if I fly planes, I sailed in the Caribbean. I just took up this crazy sport of kite surfing, and I was snow kiting on the weekend on Lake Simcoe in that crazy wind. I love it. Traveled all over the world. Don't let ADHD stop you from doing those things. Find ways that work for you so that you can have a full, interesting life too. And that's what I would leave with your audience, I guess.
I love it. Yeah. It's the game of life. Design it so it works for you.
You got it. You got it.
ADHD could be your superpower.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Awesome.